started. I'm Tricia Nickel. I'm the new Assistant Director for those that I haven't met. Thank you for coming this morning. We are delighted. Chris Kolakowski is here as the Director of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum to talk about D-Day. He has a presentation for us. So thank you for being here this morning. We appreciate it. We'll give you our time.
Sounds good. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, sir.
Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. If you cannot, just do this, and I will be more than happy to speak up. I can also, if necessary, do have a microphone if we have to go that direction too. So, but I'll put on my tour guide voice today, and we'll go with that. So, how many folks, by show of hands, have been to the Veterans Museum, particularly recently? Fantastic. Well, come on back and see us. We've got a new special exhibit that's open right now through the end of the year, Portraits of Service. And if you remember the old PBS Wisconsin World War II stories, Korea stories, Vietnam stories, we put those portraits together with stuff from our collection, and it's on the wall right now. It's really cool. By show of hands, how many of you have been to Normandy? I'm the only one, huh? Okay, well, hopefully at the end of this you might inspire you to go there. It's a really impressive place, and it's a very, very cool place. It's one of the great battlefields in the United States, which is one of the reasons we're spending time talking about it today. If anybody has any questions, I will be happy to take them afterwards. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you through an overview of the invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, and Wisconsin's role in it. Because basically everywhere there were Americans, there were Wisconsinites. And we're going to explore that using stories from our collection. If you get nothing else out of this presentation, I want you to walk away with these couple of things. The invasion of Normandy was the greatest amphibious assault in the history of the world. June 6, 1944. It was an Allied effort and an Allied victory. Leadership also made the difference at key moments between victory and defeat. And in some cases, in several cases, Badgers were heavily involved in this as well. So Wisconsin was there doing its full duty along with the rest of the United States and our allies. So let's start with, where are we in the world? Where are we in World War II? Where is Normandy, among other things? So this is a map of Europe. It's got the 1939 frontiers. Here's Germany in the center. Poland to the east. Soviet Union. Right down here, of course, is Italy, the Balkans, that area. Here's France. England. Between them, of course, is the English Channel. And right here is Normandy. And of course, you see the North African coast. By the summer of 1944, when the Allies land at Normandy, basically the Germans control most of the central part of the map. They're being pushed back to the pre-war borders of Poland. And Allied forces have pushed up about halfway up the Italian peninsula and have seized Rome, the first of the three Axis capitals to fall to the Allies. But everybody knows, with all of this going on, one of the decisive battles, one of the most important battles in 1944 in Europe, is going to be fought along the Channel coast. So that's where we are. There's been an army, we'll talk about how the massing and everything, but there's been invasion forces massing here in Britain as far back in some cases as 1942, preparing to strike across the English Channel. Okay, so the stakes could not be higher in the summer of 1944. The head of all this, and the person that is chosen in December of 1943 to be the commander of Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, as it's known, is this guy right here, who probably doesn't need a great deal of introduction. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Longtime Army officer, later of course becomes President of the United States. He will be in charge of a coalition headquarters, US, British, but also involving up to 25 elements of other nations that will be involved in the cross-channel attack. And the fact that an American is in charge should tell you what you need to know about who the majority of the forces are going to be, both in the immediate landing but also among the follow-up forces as well. In fact, of the 9 divisions that are involved in this assault, 2/3 are North American. There's 1 Canadian and 5 Americans. Okay?
Is that because the English troops had been decimated by that time?
Actually, that's exactly why. Britain is, and I say that, my grandmother was English. Britain had given of her blood in World War I and had suffered horrendous losses. By 1943, they have passed peak production. They've passed peak manpower. By the summer of 1944, they are going to be disbanding infantry divisions and brigades because they don't have enough replacements to keep the entire army in the field. So Britain, now I will say, that's true of the British Army. But when you talk about the British Air Force and when you talk about the British Navy, the fleet that brings this army across the English Channel is going to be over half English. So that's worth mentioning. My grandmother, by the way, for those of you who are wondering, was a telephone operator in the British Admiralty all during the war. And I will say as well, Britain was on wartime rationing until 1955. So that tells you how exhausted Britain is by this point in the war. So, but anyway, Dwight Eisenhower is in charge. This is his job. Sounds simple, right? You will enter the continent of Europe and in conjunction with other United Nations, undertake operations aimed at the heart of Germany and the destruction of her armed forces. So basically get ashore in France, get across France, and get into Germany. And the heart of Germany includes Berlin at this point and the destruction of her armed forces. Simple, right? Sounds simple, but it's really not. The Germans, of course, are not napping. They are thinking about where the Allies are going to come, and they know in the fall of 1943, they know that sometime within the next 6 to 8 months, the Allies are going to try something coming across the Channel from England. And so here's the German defenses. Here's Paris, which is the German headquarters. And you can see, and by the way, I'm going to show you a bunch of maps. They're probably going to be Rorschach tests from the back row. That's okay. I just want you to absorb the general implications. Each one of these boxes is a German division. And you notice how most of them are concentrated in the area from Normandy through the Calais area all the way up to the Netherlands. So the Germans know this, they know generally this is coming. They don't know the exact time, but they know generally that this is going to be coming sometime in 1944. There is simply too much Allied buildup here for that to be completely hidden. The Germans have also fortified. They call it the Atlantic Wall. They've put these beach obstacles up. This is in the area of Calais, but they've done this all up and down the Channel coast as well. They've got gun emplacements in here, and they've honeycombed a lot of the beach exits with defenses, with guns to hold up, if not completely destroy, decimate an Allied landing so that German tank divisions can come forward and counterattack, push the Allies back into the sea. So that's a little bit of a glimpse of the Atlantic Wall. Now, Allied planners, when they look at where to attack, they look and they need two things. They need good, clear beaches. All of the dark splotches that you see here on the map are elevated terrain. So they need good, clear, flat beaches. They also need good ports, because not only is it a matter of getting ashore, you have to sustain the army ashore and bring follow-on forces through so you can continue the campaign. And so as they look at this map, they realize there's really only two options. The first option is here at Calais. The second option is here at Normandy. Calais and Dunkirk provide good ports, flat beaches, also a very short way into Germany. Normandy is the longer way, but flat beaches, the great port of Cherbourg here. As they look at the situation, they realize two things argue in favor of Normandy. Number one, the Germans expect this is the strongest part of their defenses. They expect that that's where the Allies are going to land. Partly because the Allies had withdrawn from Dunkirk in 1940. And if it worked then, why might it not work in reverse? So they put the heart of their defenses at Calais. But the other thing is, when you put an army ashore, you're going to have to keep the fleet offshore to sustain it. And when you look at the situation, particularly in the summer, you get some nice storms through the English Channel. This is very exposed for a fleet. You've got some shelter here in the Bay of the Seine, as it's called. And by the way, the Spanish Armada in the 1500s, and the British remember this, the Spanish Armada came to grief right here in 1588. So you look at that and you realize, of all the options, Normandy is the place to go. And so that's why they choose to invade at Normandy. This is the overall plan that is drawn up. It's known as Operation Overlord. They're going to use U.S. First Army, British Second Army, come across. British are going to land here to the east, the Americans to the west. I'm going to show you a more detailed map in a little bit. 2 U.S. Airborne Divisions are going to assist the landing here. 1 British Airborne Division is going to assist the landing here. The idea is to force your way ashore and then push south and then push east into France. And you can see just the amount of blue boxes up there, the amount that's there. Air Force and land and sea. The amount of Air Force, by the way, that's committed is we fly 8,600 sorties, 8,200 sorties, British and American, on June 6, 1944. Anybody have any idea how many the German Air Force flies on that day? 250. And one of the reasons that we are able to do that is because in the weeks and months before, Allied bombers and fighters range over Germany and range over France and are able to force the German Air Force into air battles that we proceed to win. And so it takes control of the skies over Europe and over the English Channel, which helps enable this offensive to begin. This is a photograph here of the buildup. A lot of this has come over across the Atlantic from the United States. In fact, all of these ships are known as LSTs, landing ship tanks. You roll on, you roll off. They're designed to come right up to the beach. You drive off, you go off the beach, you go right into battle. These are incredibly useful things.
Was that, sorry.
Yeah.
Was that Churchill's design?
No, it wasn't. It was one of the landing craft that was.
Okay.
So I said the D-Day invasion is planned for June 5th. And there, by the way, there's a movie about this coming out later this year. But they've been watching the weather forecast, and the weather forecast for June 5th calls for storms, marginal conditions. And so Ike, who has basically got his entire army ready to go, his entire forces ready to go, has to make a decision. And he says, we're going to postpone 24 hours. Group Captain Stagg, my chief meteorologist, can you get me better weather? And that's a paraphrase, but it's the essential message. On the evening of the 4th of June, while the early morning hours of June 5th, they meet to talk about the weather forecast on June 6th. It's going to be partly cloudy, partly clear. There's going to be some waves, but it's going to be better than June 5th. And if we don't go on June 6th, we're going to have to wait 2 weeks for the tides and the moon to be right again. Eisenhower looks at the situation, polls his commanders, and he says, we can't dangle this thing out on a limb for too long. They're at peak readiness, and he says, well, let's go with marginal conditions. It's a good thing, too, because 2 weeks later, a massive typhoon struck the English Channel, and we would not have been able to get across. So he decides to go. Okay, let's go. And he makes the decision to go. And that will send everybody into battle on the 6th of June. And then Eisenhower does something really interesting. His air commanders have been telling him that the airborne divisions are going to lose 70% of their forces in this drop. So having made the decision, late in the afternoon of June 5th, he goes out and visits one of the airfields nearby, near his headquarters. And this happens to be the 101st Division. This guy here, we're going to hear from later, who's from Wisconsin. And he goes and he talks to him. And a British observer later said, when he asked where everybody was from, they were talking about, they said the states. And he said, I heard the states of the Union like rolls of battle honors be sung out. And then they start talking. And do you know what he's talking about? They're not talking about combat. He's talking about fly fishing. He's met a couple of guys from Kansas, and they're talking about fly fishing, and the best way to cast is what they're talking about. And the same observer said, there are a lot of times where the general is reinforcing the troops. He said, at this moment, I realize that the troops are reinforcing the general as much as anything else. And he watches them take off. and turns to his chief of staff with tears in his eyes and says, well, it's on, and then goes back to his headquarters. These are troops of the 101st Airborne Division. Also, US 82nd will be taking off at the same time on the evening. I'm going to show you this map again, but this gives you an overview, a detailed overview of Operation Overlord itself. Here's the 82nd 101st Airborne, which will drop in this area right here in the early morning hours of June 6th. At the same time, US 4th Division will come ashore at dawn at Utah Beach. And the idea is for them to link up. Here in the center, US 1st, US 29th Divisions will assault Omaha Beach. Just to the west will be the Rangers here at Pointe du Hoc. And then the British 2nd Army. This is all US 1st Army. British 2nd Army. British 5th Division, 50th Division, Gold, Canadian 3rd, Juno, British 3rd at Sword. And then the Sword landing will be assisted by 6th British Airborne Division, the famous Pegasus Bridge attack. If you've ever seen the movie The Longest Day, of course, they dramatized that quite well. So that's the overall plan. They're going to land, like I said, 9 divisions. And I would point out to you once again that only a third of them are British. So, again, British sector, American sector, and we'll see how it goes. I'm going to make sure I've covered everything that I need. Yes? This is what it looks like going across the channel. As they're moving these LSTs, they're moving all these ships. There's over 1,000 ships of all sizes that are making their way across the English Channel to prepare for this invasion. And it's an air armada. We already talked a little bit about the air armada on June 6th. This is what it looks like from the ocean, from an LST. Robert Lankow of Milwaukee talks about this, and these are all from oral histories that we have in our collection. He said, the armada of airplanes blocked out the moon, because remember, they're sailing over that night to make a dawn attack on June 6th. I'm telling you, we made 43 crossings before we had to go tie up, have some engines overhauled. We were on Juno, we were on Sword, Gold, Utah, Omaha, so he saw the whole thing. But the initial day, I turned 19 on June 2nd, and on the 6th, I was on the beaches of Normandy. Talk about growing up quick, right? Milo Flayton of the 29th Division. I'm an honorary colonel of the assault, the regiment that made the assault, the 116th Infantry. Milo Flayton, who was in the 116th and will be one of the first guys ashore at Omaha Beach, described this once they anchored. We could see France. We could see the landmass. We couldn't see much of it, but you could see it was dawn. I don't know if it was dawn when we first came up. We went up and ate breakfast and went back down and came back up, and it was getting light. And the motors went off on the ship. In other words, the motors stopped. Everything got quiet, and you'd been listening to this damn motor for 3 days, and you could hear, and all of a sudden, there was quiet. And that added to the apprehension, at least to mine. This is an overall map of Utah Beach. The big thing I want you to absorb from this is here's the American landings at dawn on June 6th, coming in from the sea. But all of these reds and green splotches are where the airborne troops dropped. They were supposed to drop in all of these nice little blue circles. But when the transport planes came in over the peninsula, came in over France, they started getting anti-aircraft fire, and many of them began to dodge and weave. And so what happens is they're dropped all over the place. And it's not as organized as you would think. Fortunately, there's enough that are dropped nearby that they're able to develop some level of organization. But even so, the airborne troops are all over the place. And it's going to be tougher for them to do their job to support the sea landing. And Hans Sanz, the guy I showed you the photograph earlier with Eisenhower, this is what he had to say. He's from Stoughton. There are no trees right near me. I came down. I couldn't see much. When you got down closer to the ground, you could see better. I don't know how high we were when we jumped. It may have been about 500 feet. I don't know. It doesn't take long to get down. I landed in kind of a courtyard. There was a vegetable garden over here, and I saw a couple of equipment bundles laying in that vegetable garden. I thought, well, at least I jumped close to a bundle. But slowly over the hours, because these guys land about a little after midnight on June 6th, slowly over the next few hours, most of these troops find each other and begin to set out on their missions to assist the seaboard landing. The highest ranking Wisconsin casualty, in fact, the highest ranking American casualty of the war, of the June 6th, is this guy here, Don Pratt, who goes in a glider. He's the assistant division commander of the 101st Airborne Division. And he's branch of artillery. UW ROTC, class of 1917. Don Pratt's glider crashes, and he's killed instantly. He's the senior American. In fact, the Divisional Museum, the 101st Airborne Divisional Museum at Fort Campbell, is named in his honor. But he is the highest ranking, both Wisconsinite and highest ranking American to die on June 6, 1944. And then the seaborne landing happens on the morning of June 6th. This 4th Division comes ashore at dawn. They come ashore, as you can see, as landings go, there's better, there's worse. But as they're coming ashore, they realize they're in the wrong spot. The currents have moved the landing craft, have pushed the landing craft a half a mile south of where they're supposed to be. This guy here has come ashore with the first wave, Theodore Roosevelt Jr. Everybody's confused on the beach because the landmarks they've been training to see, they're not seeing. He looks at the situation, begins to straighten it out, calls all the senior leaders together and says, we're starting a war from right here. Let's go inland. And he takes control of the whole situation. His leadership earns him the Medal of Honor this day and makes all the difference for getting us inland and getting us organized. And this is his follow-on troops. They push, they huddle it, they group at the seawall, go over, and begin to try and find and link up with the airborne guys inland. This is a guy from Reedsburg that was in the 4th Infantry Division. Came ashore mid-morning, June 6th, I believe. Fortunately, we were landing in Utah instead of Omaha. Those poor guys. We had sniper fire and some machine, but no problem. In other words, fairly light resistance. There was some German resistance, but fairly light. Part of the reason for that is they landed in the wrong spot. Where the German defenses were, had they landed in the right spot, it would have been much tougher to get off the beach. But in this case, they're able to get off the beach, but no problem. But then they started to see things inland. What grieved me so much was seeing some of those paratroopers hanging from a tree and shot to death. They never had a chance. Pointe du Hoc. Pointe du Hoc is a sheer cliff. Atop that cliff, the Germans had placed significant gun emplacements that would harass and create a significant threat to the Allied invasion fleet anchored offshore. They had to be dealt with. And so the 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions, elements of them, land here at the base of the cliff, and then we'll fix these rope ladders, go up, and they'll take the guns. So finally the casemate's empty. The Germans had the guns a couple miles inland. They were going to install them later in the week. But we got there just in time. This is a tremendously dramatic moment. If you've ever seen the movie The Longest Day, the dramatization of this attack is outstanding. And you can see here how steep it is. Imagine trying to climb that under German fire. It's a tremendous, tremendous example of Ranger courage. This guy from River Falls was there. And he speaks to the human element. We should never ever forget when we look at photographs or when we look at maps that these are people just like us. And this quote really gets it down. He's a mortarman. He said, we had a mortar, I had 10 mortar shells, we pulled in, our ramp on our landing craft came down and hit, we went down, we got off. As my partner set up the mortar, my hands were shaking, like that's the only time I was ever scared. And Jim, who's his buddy, who's his mortarman, what the hell's the matter, Donnie? I said, nothing. And from that time on, well, it just went away. Just like you'd electrified me or something like that, the fear just left me. Then I dropped in those 10 mortar shells, and I went up the ropes to the top of the cliff. Omaha Beach. We're moving east along the landing fronts. 6:30 in the morning, 2 regiments are going to land, about 6,000 guys. U.S. 116th over here, 16th Infantry over here, 29th Division, 1st Division. You can see it's supposed to be a nice, easy, orderly landing, but then you look and see where everybody actually landed. currents are messing with them and pushing troops to the east. In fact, most of the troops are going to end up basically concentrated over here in this area. I'm going to show you some photographs here in a minute, but I also want to show you down here. Heights overlooking 120 feet, 150 feet where the Germans are. There's a 200-yard shelf, and then you've got the beach, which they're landing at low tide, so that's another 300 feet. You got 500 yards of open beach before you can get shelter under German machine gun fire. This is what it looks like in the early waves. This is the 16th Infantry, elements of the 16th Infantry going ashore, and you can see all this smoke here from fire. And you can also see bodies and equipment is beginning to pile up at low water. The first 3 waves sustained an average of 70% losses when they come ashore. Scott Stevenson lands at Omaha with the 1st Infantry Division. He said, all our officers were in front in our landing craft. They were all killed before we stepped off. And I knew nobody knew how to turn down the ramp. Most of us jumped over the side and got out. A couple of guys in boats were in 12 feet of water. Almost everybody drowned because they were weighed down with 70 pounds of stuff. Out of the whole company who I was with, I haven't seen one person since that time. Not on the beach or afterwards. He's the lucky one. Later waves come in. This is, you can tell this is a later wave because of the amount of equipment, more equipment is built up. There are groups of men, and you can see them kind of in the distance in this photograph here, that have gotten up to the base where there's some protection because the Germans can't depress their guns far enough. It's called a defilade. So they're kind of in that area, grouped in that area, trying to regroup and figure out how to get off the beach. In fact, it gets so bad that late in the morning, there's some discussion out at the headquarters ships. Do we want to evacuate? Do we want to call this off? And they decide not to, as they start to see reports of Americans starting to get up those hills. But this is a little bit later in the morning. John Ellery of Stoughton lands in the late morning or in the mid-morning. Where I landed, there was quite a bit of salt marsh, and when you got through all of that, then you were at the bottom of the bluff that I'd estimate 50 feet high. Then you were under fire from the time you were within a mile, at least to the point of where you were going to drop the ramp on your landing craft. So getting across the beach and getting up to the heights was a devastating experience. To this day, I don't understand really where the men got the courage to do that. It could have been a very demoralizing experience, yet I saw men charging up over the shield bank, up the slope, through a minefield, and they got to the heights. This is one of those moments where the mettle of the American soldier is tested, is at the bottom of those heights. You can't stay where you are. You can't go back. There's only one choice: go forward. Leadership, again, makes the difference. If you've ever seen The Longest Day, Robert Mitchum plays this guy. Norman Cota, who is the Assistant Division Commander of the 29th Division. He, several other officers as well, begin to go up and down that group of men. Let's get inland. In fact, he says, we can either stay on the beach and get killed, or let's go inland and get killed. But it works. That leadership, that fearless leadership, that organization works. And these men from both the 29th and the 1st begin to get inland. They don't get inland very much before nightfall, but they do get off the beach and eliminate most of the German defenses. And it's a tremendously bloody day, but it ends up being successful. And we end up getting ashore in that sector as well. The British have a bit easier time to the east at Gold Beach. This is the 50th Division coming ashore at Gold Beach. Notice the tide, notice the rough surf. This is what it looks like from the air. That's a pretty impressive photograph to me. Particularly as you look down and you can see the landing craft coming in and out, and the troops coming ashore, and the smoke from the artillery. The more you look at it, the more detail comes out. Harold Brown of Madison was viewing the invasion from that perspective. He said, here I am 3,000 feet over the beach. I can see the ships starting to come in daylight, and all of a sudden a blanket of fire from ships to shore, and then from shore to ships. That's the Germans retaliating. And then I saw the landing barges. They let go about 6 miles out or something, and they had quite a ride in. This is the Canadians landing at Kersol-sur-Mer in Juno Beach. Deepest penetration on June 6th is the 3rd Canadian Division. They have to do some very stiff fighting in the process. Canada's Overseas National Museum of World War II is now located right in there on the photograph. That tells you how important Juno Beach is to the Canadians. And then the British landing at Sword Beach. This photograph is a study in body language. And you can see, we were talking about British war weariness earlier. See it on that guy's face right there. By the end of the day, the Allies are ashore. They've gotten ashore at Sword, they've gotten ashore at Juno and Gold, linked those beaches up. They've gotten ashore at Omaha, Point du Hoc, 4th Division, and the Airborne have secured some of their objectives, but nonetheless, the Allies are here to stay. And over the next days, they will link up the entire beach, and this solid red line will be the extent of the Allied lodgment after a week of fighting. This is, the fact that this landing succeeds marks the beginning of the end of Nazi Germany. And less than a year from now, Germany will succumb on May 8th, 1945, to a combined offensive from the Soviets from the east and this campaign, which started here at Normandy and ended in central Germany. Wisconsin was there. Wisconsinites did their full duty. Let me give you a couple of numbers, a couple other things to think about. The Allies used 2 million troops from 14 nations, lost 226,000 from June 6th to August 25th, 1944. Total U.S. casualties, killed, wounded, captured, missing, on June 6, 1944, total about 6,500.
Did you do me?
Germans had 1 million men during the campaign, lost over 400,000. 19,000 French civilians will pay the price for liberation. And of those Americans, 46 Badgers we've identified were killed in action or mortally wounded on June 6th, 1944. Every sector that the Americans were, there was a Wisconsinite there, and some of them paid the full price. A couple of last word quotes here. Campaign in the summer of 1944 included some of the most spectacular ground action of the U.S. Army during World War II. I would agree. If you want to understand how Americans fight, the Normandy invasion is a great example to look at. Carlo d'Este, 1983. The Allied invasion of Normandy on 6 June 1944 was the most complex and daring military operation in the history of modern warfare. He's right. Its eventual success was a testament to the cooperation of allies. And if you want to know more, here's a couple of great books to check out. Anthony Beaver's V-Day book is outstanding. The Longest Day by Cornelius Ryan remains a classic. Joe Belkowski's Beyond the Beachhead of the 29th Division is fantastic. From a German perspective, Paul Carell, and then the biography of Eisenhower down there is absolutely unparalleled if you want to understand who the Supreme Commander was and what they did. So I hope in the short amount of time I've been able to give you here today, I've been able to give you a little bit of a feel for this battle, why it's important, but also give you an idea. Wisconsin was there. That's one of the things that we teach at the Veterans Museums. Every veteran's a story. Wisconsin was there. This still matters. We think of these historical events, but we don't always think about the fact that Badgers were there. And in this case, Badgers were. And they did their full duty. And they were people just like us who were doing an incredible thing to win the Second World War and contribute to one of the great battles that led to the winning of the Second World War. And so I would invite you to explore this battle further, explore Wisconsinites' contributions to it further, and ask me any questions you got. So thank you all for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much. I'll go in the back first and then in the
I
front.
just got a question. How did they come up with the names for the beaches? Why did they have all these odd different names? Or did each country name their own beach or
Each
something?
country named their own beach.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, the British Army decided to do it a certain way. The United States decided to use geographic names.
How did they come up with the Omaha and the...
Personal preference either of the planner or the commander. So yeah, that's still true today as a matter of fact. If you look at some of the code names that were used during the Iraq War for objectives, somebody was a football fan because they had objectives Rams, Packers, Bears, all these different place code names that were picked out from the NFL. So it's sometimes as simple as that. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, my uncle was in the railroad, one of the divisions, and they came over a couple weeks later,
Mhm.
and then they went to Cherbourg, is that, because it seemed
Yep.
like that was a big railroad
Oh, yeah.
center? So would they have come over to Cherbourg, or what it's called, or would they come in on one of the beaches, do you know? And would the trains, did they bring them from England, did they come there, or did they bring them from the States?
So you're speaking to something that is not often appreciated, but should be. The logistical effort it took,
Right.
because they brought everything over across the channel, including the trains. They did
Oh,
bring
they
them.
did bring
They did bring them. The rail, in fact, you can see this is one of the rail lines right here that is used, that
Because
he
they
will
had to
operate.
rebuild them, didn't
Yep.
they?
Yeah, because we bombed the heck out of
Yeah.
them, so the Germans couldn't use them. Cherbourg is the big port that they want. They've also created mulberry harbors, as they're known, artificial harbors, right here and right here. And so you'll get, depending on when he landed, he either came in on one of the mulberries and then up to Cherbourg, or came directly in Cherbourg here. By about September, he would have come right in here.
Okay, it was earlier, and then he remembers sleeping in the fields that paratroopers were hanging, they'd smell the dead paratroopers.
That would have been right here.
Oh,
That would have
okay.
been right there. Which makes sense, because they probably brought in the personnel first, and then once they got some of this developed, were able to bring in the engines and the heavy stuff through Cherbourg. So that would make perfect sense.
Because then he would talk, they'd run the trains without lights on at night, so they wouldn't get bombed.
That's, yeah, blackout
It was,
conditions.
is there a book that's really good that talks about the railroad's involvement or not?
Ooh,
Because I think it's really interesting.
the Army official history has 2 volumes you might want to check out. The Supreme Command, and then there's logistics support to the armies. That has a section on both the Red Ball Express, but also the rail support here and elsewhere. So I would check both of those.
What is the name of
The Supreme Command, and then logistics support to the armies.
those are just books you can get out, or they're what, reference books?
I'll give you a card after this.
Okay.
I'll send you some, you can find them online if you know where to look, and I can
Okay.
send you the link.
Okay.
Yeah.
Given the weather events around June 5, 6, didn't the German command sort of let its guard down, thinking that there would not be an invasion in that maritime frame?
So
Could you
this,
explain?
if this was a Normandy overview talk, I would have gotten into that more. But because I was focused on the Badgers, but you're right. Most people don't realize, one of the most important things that German U-boats did to support the war effort was surface, see what the weather was, and radio it to Berlin. Because the Germans, unlike us, didn't have good meteorology west of France, except those U-boats. And by the spring, summer of 1944, we've pretty much taken care of the U-boat mess. The reason that I bring that up is when Group Captain Stagg is figuring out what the weather's going to be, he can consult readings from Greenland, from North America, from Britain, from Ireland, from all over the place, not available to the Germans. So the Germans look at this, oh, it's going to be 3 days of really terrible weather. There is no way the Allies are going to land. So they schedule actually a command post war game just off the map down here for the morning of June 6th. And so that means the night of June 5th, a lot of key German commanders are on the road. Some of them getting killed by between the French resistance and some American paratroopers. And so it creates some confusion in the Germans. Famously, the overall commander of this entire sector, Erwin Rommel, his wife's birthday is June 6th. He had gone shopping in Paris and decided this is a perfect opportunity for me to go on leave. So he is at home, happy birthday, dear. Phone rings. Oh. And so he has to hustle back to France. But it creates confusion. The Germans were caught a little bit flat-footed. And part of it is they just didn't have as good weather forecasting, readings and weather forecasting as we did. Thankfully. Anybody else?
I'm just amazed that, like, that person who turned 19 and then had to go to Normandy, that means like maybe had 1 year of training to be prepared for all this. Was that just common?
1 year of intense training, yeah, but it's not, you know, you figure the average basic training even today is 9, 12 weeks, depending on service and what your job is. And then you go to your advanced training, you know, so you are trained to a peak efficiency, and then you deploy. It's a system that still works very similarly today. And this is full-time training. You know, they lock you up at a base, you know, just like Naval Station Great Lakes today. If you join the Navy, that's where you do your basic training. You don't see Chicago for 8 to 12 weeks, if not longer. You know, and so it's a real concentrated environment. But the point is, of all that, is that when you get through that training, which may seem short to some of us, but when you get through that, you've got the skills you need to both do your job effectively, but also survive. And that's, obviously it pays off. Obviously it pays off. Yeah.
Why couldn't the guys get the boat ramps down? Was it that difficult and nobody told them how to do it, or you had to have a key or something, or?
So part of that is damage from German fire.
Oh, okay.
Part of that is, remember, it's choppy weather.
Yeah,
Get a couple of waves that may jam the ramp.
okay.
You know, it's one of those, particularly if you're driving into a heavy sea. I don't know if any of you have sailed before, but if you drive into a heavy sea, the boat ramp is flat. The front end is flat like this. And you're driving in, and the waves are doing this. It's pushing it in. It's jamming the mechanism. Sometimes salt water gets into those mechanisms, and it creates issues, creates friction, shorts out sometimes electric. There's some accounts of some of those guys that had those issues, and in several cases had to turn around and go back to the mother ship and didn't land until later.
You said the officers were killed over that. I thought that indicated why the officers are the ones that knew how to get the ramp down or something.
No, the officers are the ones that are leading out. And you ever seen Saving Private Ryan?
Yeah.
Ever seen that movie? You know when the ramp drops and
Yeah.
all of a sudden the machine gun, the first 4 or 5 rows of guys
Yeah.
get hit with the machine gun? That's what I picture when I read about the officers all getting,
So-
is literally the ramp, in that case the ramp dropped, German machine gun from the, could see it, took a bead on it, let it get, let fly. And you just saw 4 or 5 rows just, they didn't even stand a chance. It just got hit, fell back, fell forward, whatever, and then everybody else has to either go over the side or climb over those bodies and try and get through that gunfire. And I thought that movie did a fantastic job depicting the Omaha Beach landing. It really, but that's what I picture when I read that quote.
Did they consider when these guys get off carrying all the equipment that the water might be as deep as it was, or was it real hard to tell what the tide was and everything?
Oh, they knew what the tide was going to be. What they didn't count on, or what they overestimated, was that the air and the sea bombardment was supposed to do a better job knocking out the German defenses. In fact, they had told the troops, particularly on Omaha, they had told the troops that when you land, the bombers will have just done a bombing run. So you will have craters to shelter in on the beach. But what they didn't count on was that the Air Force, as they're flying over the fleet, a bunch of the bombardiers say, you know what? I don't want to risk bombing our own ships. I'm going to hold an extra second before releasing the bombs. So what that meant was, instead of dropping on the beaches and immediately area around the beaches, a lot of them end up inland 3 or 4 miles. And so that is something that wasn't counted on. They knew they were landing at low tide. In fact, they wanted to land at low tide so that those beach obstacles weren't covered by water.
But so they were farther out than they wanted to be then because they bombed farther inland, or what, when they landed? That was so deep from the guys drowned. With all their
I
gear.
know. Okay. The other thing that happened, first of all, the Air Force, so there's no craters on the beach, so there's not as much shelter. But the other thing is some of those German heavy guns, shells exploded underwater, created a crater. And so you go over thinking, oh, this will be okay. And then in other cases where the German gunfire is hitting you that far out, remember one of the guys said how, we were taking fire pretty far out. You get some, disabled boats that either sinking. In one case, there's a boat that's carrying 12 guys. It sinks. They put on their life belts and spend about 6 hours in the water, just holding each other in a circle until they're picked up. And they're floating. They're able to survive and then later come back ashore with a later wave. So all kinds of things are happening to these boats, and it depends on what's happening. And in some cases, it's like, you know what? This is as far as we're going to get. We're going to have to wade the rest of the way. Let's go. And unfortunately, in many cases, they sink like stones because they're too deep. That's part of the tragedy. It's a tragedy of all war, but it adds an extra element to this battle for sure.
Can you suggest any tours to Normandy that, I've seen there's a couple now, you actually stay near there instead of, like spending one day, then you're like there 4 days or something?
So I would recommend either the World War II Museum, but also the 29th Division Association does several excellent tours to Normandy. Either one of those would be fantastic. So, I think I had a question over here.
Whatever happened to the records, military records of like my father? There aren't any. Something happened to the records.
Oh, you're talking about the service records?
Yeah.
So the National Archives, the National Personnel Records Center, as it's known, in St. Louis in 1973, had a catastrophic fire. And it burned about 75% of the U.S. Army service records from World War II, and some of the Navy and some of the Air Force, and I think a few of the Marines. But it really did a number. Is your father from Wisconsin?
Yeah.
Okay. Get my card, because as next of kin, we have state copies of all of those records. So it's like his discharge form and some other things. So get my card. I will connect you with our research archivist, who can help you determine what we got and hopefully get you some information.
Wow.
One of the services we provide. Yeah.
Are other states similarly endowed?
Are other states?
Similarly endowed with the backup state record systems?
Depends on the state. Some states, yes. Some states, not so much. We are very blessed here to be able to have that. I would recommend, if you're looking for somebody from another state, I would recommend reaching out to that particular state's veterans, their equivalent of the Veterans Affairs Department like we have here. It's called Veterans Services. It's called all kinds of different things in different states. But I would reach out to them and see what they would advise. It can't hurt. It can't hurt to ask the question.
Was there a sandbar at one of the beaches that caused some of the boats to drop their ramps early and then the guys went out and then got deeper again or something?
You are, I believe you're getting mixed up with the Battle of Tarawa in November 1943, where there was it was a coral atoll.
Okay.
And a lot of the landing craft, because of the water, they misjudged the water, couldn't go past the reef.
Oh.
So they had to drop at the reef, and then the Marines waded in another several hundred yards from here to downtown,
But it
from here to the
wasn't,
square,
it
under fire.
wasn't too deep, so they didn't bunch up to the ground, or they did?
Some of them drowned, but the vast majority of them were hit by Japanese machine gun fire, tipped over into the water, and then drowned. So, yeah, that's a horrific fight. And actually, the lessons of that battle helped influence conduct of this invasion here. Well, come on down to Madison and see us, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.